train your English listening B2 level.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this meeting to review this year's Arts Festival. As you know, this is the fourth and biggest festival that we've run at the university, and it's clear now that it's fast becoming a fixture in the calendar of the city and the county, and attracting attention from the rest of the country, as well as from abroad. First of all, I'd like to review the preparations for the festival, then go on to do an analysis of the festival itself and how well it went. The plan is then for you to work in teams of 3, with 1 tutor and 2 students in each team, and for you to discuss the festival in more detail so you can come up with suggestions for the organizing committee to consider for next year's festival. Well, as I said, we're in our 4th year, and we added some new events. The first festival focused mainly on music and the performing arts, as it was felt that those would be the best types of event for both students and the public to take part in. More forms of art, in particular short films and photography, were added over the next 2 years, and this year we extended our offer to include painting and crafts, with a particular focus on the students here producing their own work, both for exhibition and competition. This was largely successful, but I'll discuss that in detail later. We also invited professional artists in some of the fields to perform, and that will be something for you to review for the next event. What was particularly encouraging this year was that we had contributions to the festival from the highest number of students to date, with representatives from every nationality at the university. As in previous years, we plan to use the spare university accommodation for all the visitors, both students and non-students. But as we expected a greater attendance at this year's festival, we also arranged accommodation at the City College 3 miles from here, and arranged coach transfers between the college and the university campus. Unfortunately, that proved problematic, and we won't repeat those arrangements next year. We also arranged the catering both here and at the City College, and one of the new ideas we tried was to experiment with dishes based on different regional themes over the 5 days. This allowed our international students, well, the keen cooks among them anyway, to create the menus and work with the catering company to produce breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Of course, one of the main aims of this festival, apart from the obvious ones of extending the university's reputation and giving our students the chance to take part in a wonderful event, was to help develop our young people's organizational skills and give them some experience of real work, mostly as volunteers. Of course, we had to pay for professional organizers to make sure the festival ran well, but as our money was limited and we wanted to give as many opportunities to our students as possible, we made sure that they ran all of the events themselves under the direction of the professionals and, of course, alongside the tutors. So, now let me turn to the actual event and how it went. As I said, we had the biggest offer of arts events in the 4 years we've been running the festival. In total, the number of visitors over the whole 5 days was 12,500, which is a 10% increase on the previous year and just over 3 times the number in the first year that we held it. This clearly shows that we're going in the right direction by expanding the variety of events on offer. The short film event at the University Cinema was the best attended, with entries from a wide variety of nationalities here at the university on a number of fascinating topics. I think we can all agree that the quality was excellent, as was the standard of the photography exhibition and the paintings in the art gallery. Our feedback from students and visitors was very positive. However, there are 3 issues that we should address in our discussions. Firstly, Wayne Rogers, our headline music act, had to call off 2 days before the event due to illness, and we didn't have time to find another act. Needless to say, all those who bought tickets for the main concert were disappointed, and we had to return their money. We need to discuss suggestions for avoiding this in the future. Also, while we had some good crafts on display, especially the clothes, pottery, sculptures, and glass objects, the exhibition was poorly attended, so we have to decide if it needs to be changed or perhaps reduced in some way. The last issue involves the art gallery and, in particular, security. Although we had attendants on duty all the time, 3 paintings were stolen, much to the disappointment of the artists who painted them. They were valued at around £3,000 in total, and the artists had expected to be able to sell them in the future. So we need to look into this and think about how we can increase security for next year, while also avoiding any unnecessary inconvenience for our visitors. Regarding the arrangements for accommodation and catering, generally things went well, but there were some issues with the accommodation in the City College. As there were a lot of late bookings, we had to provide more accommodation than we had originally planned to do, with the result that some people ended up in accommodation of a lower standard than they expected. We apologized to them and gave them back part of their payments, but we need to avoid this issue in the future, especially as the festival is growing and we don't want to harm our reputation. Another issue was that at certain times of the day, there were not enough volunteers on hand to help visitors, so we'll need to make sure that we organize the availability of volunteers better next time. On the other hand, the transport that we organized was excellent, and the catering was highly appreciated, both in terms of variety and quality. So I'd like you to think of more ideas to extend the catering opportunities for next year. The last thing I want to focus on now is how much we spent. As I said earlier, we had budgeted for £50,000 to organize the event and expected £50,000 in earnings. But the final balance sheet showed that the event actually raised just over £90,000. So we have plenty of money to go into the budget for next year, which is an excellent result. However, I feel there are still some areas where we could cut our spending and perhaps reduce charges for visitors. Many of the volunteers felt that some of the paid helpers that we brought in to supervise the activities were not really worth the expense. They felt that some of them did very little for what we paid them, and others didn't really organize some of the events that well. So I would welcome suggestions on improving organization while saving money. Also, I feel that another good way of raising funds is to get more business support from local companies who could help the festival grow by sponsoring events and advertising their products and services more around the festival. Now I'd like to turn to other...
So, first of all, we need to look at the events and see what should be included in next year's festival and what changes should be made. Dr. Saunders mentioned that there were issues with the music and crafts. What are your feelings on those 2 issues? Do you want to start, Sangeeta?
Well, as regards the music, I think we need to have another artist in reserve in case the main act can't perform, like in this year's festival. It doesn't have to be a well-known band. It could be a small act, like a student band. What do you think, Lawrence?
You have a point, but I'm not really sure if any artists would be happy to perform only if the main act lets us down. In any case, how often does that happen? This was the first time, and I don't see it happening again in the future.
I'm not sure we can take that for granted, Lawrence. If you look at what happened, we lost £3,000 as we had to return money to the audience. I don't think anything bad would have happened, but I think we need to bear in mind that our visitors are the most important aspect of the festival, and we have to make sure we keep them happy at all costs.
How about we arrange the program so that on one night there isn't a famous headline act, but a good local band, so that we can change the program to make them the main act if anyone else isn't able to perform. We could put them on the last evening and tell them that they may be needed on the other evenings, just in case. That way, we're helping good local talent and making sure that our visitors are happy.
Yes, I can see that working. Then we could use the student band to play the last night if we have to switch the local band from the last night to an earlier night.
OK, good ideas. I'll make a note so that we can take it back to the organising committee. Now, let's move on to the question of crafts. As we heard, the event didn't go very well and lacked visitors. What do you think we should do, Sangeeta?
Well, I have a personal interest in this. I've been creating my own fashion designs, and I had some clothes on display mixing Western and Indian themes. Actually, I spent some time watching the visitors, and I thought they liked the clothes a lot. I think we have to be careful to distinguish the clothes from the other crafts.
Yes, I noticed that. I spent the third day in the crafts section helping visitors, and I noticed that the clothes exhibition was the most appreciated. I think the glass and ceramic section had hardly any visitors when I was there. Perhaps we should just have the clothes on display, maybe even extend that section?
Yes, that could be a good solution. I don't think we should get rid of the glass and pottery altogether, but I certainly think we should promote the clothes section more.
Well, here's a suggestion. We could even think of turning that into a separate fashion show. What do you think of that?
Good idea. I was thinking about that anyway. Can we put that to the committee?
Of course, I've made a note of it. Regarding the theatre and poetry, do you think we need to make any changes?
Nothing major, I don't think, but perhaps we should use at least one day to present new plays and poems by our own students. It's wonderful putting on plays by well-known playwrights and readings of well-known poets, but perhaps we should promote our own talent here in the university. It would certainly help the performing arts students to expand their coursework, and we could have a competition for the best new works.
Excellent idea, Lawrence. What do you think, Sangeeta?
Yes, but let's not limit it to just English. We could also have performances from our international students in their languages. I think that would really help promote the festival as an international event.
Fine, we can propose that as well. And as far as the photography and cinema sections are concerned, they'll keep expanding.
Well, personally, I don't think the quality of the photography exhibition was very high. I think there are issues with digital photography being presented as a printed exhibition. You can never really capture the true meaning of the photograph like that. I would suggest just having digital displays, tablets that visitors can use to see the photographer's collection. That way, it'll encourage photographers to develop their ideas and think about their exhibits almost as films with a story. I think that's the way photography is going these days.
I don't agree. I think each image should be appreciated in its own way, as the photographer intends. I don't think we should push photographers into one direction. That said, I think the idea of having tablets and digital screens is a good idea if we can afford it. Perhaps we could have two sections, digital displays and non-digital displays.
Sounds good, Sangeeta. I can certainly put that to the committee and see if they'll consider it. So if that's all about the events themselves, I'd like to discuss the organisation of the festival. Now, the next thing I think we should discuss is the accommodation situation. It seems clear that the number of visitors is set to grow, so we need to have a suitable plan in place to deal with the increased numbers. We don't want a repeat of this year. What do you think, Lawrence?
Actually, I saw the accommodation that we used at the city college, and it was pretty basic, though it was clean and tidy. There was only a bed and a desk in each room. Another thing that visitors complained about was the lack of Wi-Fi in the rooms, especially as they paid for rooms with Wi-Fi. It certainly wasn't ideal.
Do you have anything to add, Sangeeta?
Yeah, I can understand why they weren't happy. I'd have felt the same in their position.
Well, there's that new holiday development at Elm Park, quite close to the university. Perhaps we could use their rooms. After all, it won't be the holiday high season, so there should be plenty of empty rooms that we could use.
That's true. How about taking over some of their rooms and advertising them as accommodation specifically for families with children? They're going to have an outdoor and an indoor adventure area for young people. We had quite a few teenagers this year coming with their parents. If we can attract more by offering them the facilities at the holiday park in a special package, they can go there if they get bored with the festival.
Excellent idea. They'll be around 15 or 16 years old, and when they come to the festival, they'll get an idea of what it'd be like to study here. I'm sure it'll help our future prospects as a university.
I agree. I'll be happy to present those ideas to the committee. Moving on to the catering, it seems clear that the idea of theme days with different kinds of national and regional dishes went down very well. I'll recommend repeating it next year, but do you have anything else to say about the catering?
Not really. One thing is that maybe we could tell the students about the festival earlier in the year and invite them to suggest themes, and also to volunteer their own cooking skills to help with it. I think that'll make sure that we vary what we offer from year to year so that we don't just repeat the same dishes each time.
But we should always have fish and chips on the menu. We can't do without that. Seriously, though, I agree.
OK, I'll make a note of that as well. Moving on to the helpers, you were both directly involved in that. Do you think it was a good idea to get professionals for the organising?
In a word, no. I think the ones that I worked with didn't really know what they were doing. We were paying them a lot to do their work, but I don't think they really took it as seriously as they should have. They were thinking it was just a student event. On more than one occasion, some of the volunteers had to take charge and make sure that the events went smoothly.
Yes, you're right. That was my experience as well. We ended up paying them a lot of money for poor service. It was one of the reasons why there were too few volunteers at some events, because the organization was so poor. I think the idea of bringing back former students is a good idea. At least then we can be more certain that they know about the university and they'll probably be more committed to doing a good job.
I think you're both right. I was disappointed, and I think former students will be a great improvement, so I'll note that as well. We need to talk about finance, but before that, I just want to mention the issue of security. Thinking about the stolen paintings, what do you think we should do about that?
I'm not really sure. I mean, we had the university security guards on duty the whole time, so I don't think we can really add to that.
Well, I noticed on more than one occasion that there were windows open in some rooms, which made it easy for people to climb in and steal things. I think the main thing is to remind students and volunteers that it's their personal responsibility to be careful and look out for any security issues. So, if one of us sees an open window, we should either check with security why it's open or simply close it.
You're right, Sangeeta. I'm sure the committee is aware of this, but I'll note it just to show that we've given it some thought. Now, finance. What are your feelings on Dr. Saunders' suggestions about sponsorship?
I don't think that will go down too well with most students. I mean, personally, I'm not against it, but I think students generally won't be very keen to have businesses involved in what they see as their arts festival. I'm sure they'll be happy to take part in more events to raise money throughout the year before the festival, but they won't be happy about big businesses taking over and having their names all over the university.
Well, I think it's going to happen anyway. Everything is commercial to some extent these days. I don't think it's a bad idea, as long as it's done in good taste. I think any businesses that do want to sponsor us or advertise should be aware that they need to work closely with us and respect the spirit of the festival.
Perhaps we could involve local businesses as well as national ones that don't just put their name on the festival, but can actually sponsor specific events, award prizes, and so on. So, for example, a local cinema could sponsor the short film event and even send along a representative to judge the films, that sort of thing.
Yes, I see what you mean. In that way, they'll be directly involved in the festival, which will encourage them to take an active part and build up their reputations for supporting the arts. Well, thank you both. We have a lot of useful suggestions to take back to the committee. Hello, Dr. Saunders. I just want to tell you about the suggestions that Lawrence and Sangeeta made during our discussion and see what you think.
Thanks, yes, please do.
First of all, regarding the music, they think that it might be a good idea to have a good local band who can replace the main act if it has to let us down at the last minute, which is what happened this year. The band could be scheduled for later in the week on the understanding that they might have to play on an earlier night. We could also have one evening with a student band.
Well, it sounds good in theory to plan a rearrangement, but I think it would be too complicated to arrange. We would depend too much on all the bands being able to play on any of the nights. I think it's simpler just to give the audience a refund if it happens again. But I'm happy to have one evening supporting local bands and student bands, as that's the main point of the festival, to encourage people to take part.
The next thing is the crafts. They felt that a fashion show would be a good way of expanding the clothes exhibition, and that perhaps we should reduce or even get rid of the glass and pottery exhibition.
Well, first of all, I think that the fashion show is a good idea, as it can help the international students to get involved in more activities and develop their ideas with clothes. But I'm not keen to get rid of the glass and pottery exhibitions completely, as it's important for the university to be seen to encourage all forms of art, and not just the most popular ones. So we should keep that for the time being.
OK. Now, regarding theatre and poetry, they felt that it would be good for students to write and perform their own plays and poetry, as well as those by famous playwrights and poets.
That sounds like an excellent idea. It'd help a lot to raise standards in writing and performance. I'd love to see that taking place.
Also, on that topic, there was a feeling that works in other languages should be encouraged.
Most certainly. That would help the international students feel far more at home and valued as part of the university.
There was one other event we discussed, and that was photography. It was felt that we should have both digital and non-digital exhibits.
I don't think we could manage that, at least not yet. High-quality tablets and screens would be too expensive, especially with the number we'd have to buy, so it's not an option for next year because of the high cost.
OK. As for the accommodation and the catering, they felt that we could use the holiday park that's being built nearby, and we should encourage students to take a greater part in cooking and helping with the catering.
Well, firstly, I know for a fact that the new holiday park is not likely to be completed by festival time next year, as they've run into trouble with the building. But we could certainly think about it in the future. I do like the idea of the students having a greater role in the catering and cooking, as it will clearly be helpful for their all-round development.
OK. The next thing is the professional organisers. They felt that the standard was quite low and that the volunteers didn't experience good leadership from them. They think it would be better to ask former students to work as organisers, as they'd be more familiar with the university and more committed too.
I appreciate that, but unfortunately that wouldn't work. It'd be too much trouble trying to find them and get them employed. However, I think we should review the organisers that we used this year and have a much better selection system in place for the next festival.
Now, the last 2 points are about security and finance. As far as security goes, they think we should do more to encourage the students to take it seriously.
I agree. If we can encourage students to be more aware of security, not just during the festival, it'd really help to increase trust among all our students, because they'll be looking out for each other.
As for finance, they thought that, firstly, we could encourage students to help raise money throughout the year, and secondly, we could encourage businesses to sponsor the events and advertise more, though it needs to be handled with care.
Well, regarding sponsorship and advertising, the committee is already looking at the possibilities, as it will encourage more interest in the activities that we do and also help our reputation generally. Unfortunately, I don't think asking the students to raise more money during the year is a good idea, as we already have a program in place for that. And if the students are involved anymore, they'll spend less time on their studies, and I don't want anything to disrupt those.
What is the difference between how people celebrate special events today compared with the past?
Well, I think that in the past, people would spend a long time preparing food or going shopping for presents. But now people tend to eat out and order their presents online. While this might seem more convenient, perhaps making an effort is part of what makes the festivals so important. I think we're losing that now.
Should we learn about the special events of other countries in school?
I certainly think we should find out as much as possible about how people in other countries live. However, I'm not sure we need to introduce all international festivals into our calendar, as people might think less of our own important festivals and culture.
What will special events be like in the future?
I think as people are getting busier, fewer events will continue to be celebrated, as people just don't have the time to celebrate all of them. On the other hand, we might also see an increase in online-only events, where family members don't travel to their parents' house, but instead wish them Happy New Year or something over web chat software. That way, although people might live far away from each other, they can still celebrate over video chat.
Do we spend too much money on special events like Valentine's Day or birthdays?
I'm not so sure about that. I think we've always spent lots of money on those things, although obviously some people do like to spend more than others. Anyway, I don't think it's the money, but the thought that counts.